welcome everyone to our Community of Practice call on Sociocracy. This is part of our topic, Tributaries of Holacracy, looking at various methods and models and ideas and concepts that were somehow informative, useful, or in some way influenced the development of Holacracy. And this call today, we're going to focus on Sociocracy in particular. And to aid me in that, I've got Bernard Marie Chiquet with me here. Bernard Marie, welcome.
No, thank you, Brian.
And Bernard Marie is, well, I see your face quite often. Bernard Marie is one of our licensed Holacracy provider firms, or works with one of our licensed Holacracy provider firms, and is one of our certified Holacracy coaches, is out there doing this work with Holacracy in the world, based in Paris, or near Paris anyway, in France. I thought, Bernard Marie, you'd be perfect to have this conversation with, partly because we've already had similar conversations, one of which is posted on our public website and our resource library, and we've talked over years now, actually, about this, and because of your background in sociocracy, you have a pretty rich background, so let me just invite you to share a bit about your background and path with sociocracy, and then coming into Holacracy, just to set some context. And then from there, I thought we could dive in and talk a bit about the history of Holacracy and my intersection with sociocracy in that path, and then start looking at the methods and look at how sociocracy did influence Holacracy and how it didn't.
Yeah, happy to do that. Yeah, happy to do that, Brian. So I used to be an entrepreneur and in the management consulting business, and also I became a CEO of some firms, and some of these firms were very large. And I stopped that sport maybe 7 to 8 years ago, and I was looking for something different. You know, all the challenge faced in organizations. Yeah, there was no method, no strategy in order to fix that. So I was looking for new staff which will concern the structure of the organization, and that's asking this question that I found in maybe 2004, maybe 2003, the Sociocracy staff, and then I took all the trainings. I did experiment it firstly in my family, as I've got 5 children, so we are 7 at home, so it's a good place to start. So we have been experimenting Sociocracy for 7 years, and then I did dive very profoundly with Sociocracy. Did all the trainings available, and the more advanced training with the International School of Leaders, and I did teach Sociocracy, and then I combined also a lot of organization with that.
Cool. And then you found Holacracy at some point, what must have been a couple years back, and took a pretty deep dive in with us.
Yeah, when I did, let's say, master the Sociocracy staff, I was having problem not with families or communities. You know, in our activities, there were both families, communities, like eco-village or thing like that. But on the other hand, I was also doing some consulting business with firms, organizational firms. And Sociocracy was quite great for all the staff. But regarding organizations, you know, it was having some limits. So somebody spoke about Holacracy to me, and I said, "Oh, Holacracy! I went to your website, and I said, oh, it looks like Sociocracy. What is the difference? It's a kind of new packaging of Sociocracy, an American way of packaging things." So that was my first reaction. So I understand very well a lot of people saying the same thing as the thing I did say at that time. It was maybe 4 years ago or 3 years ago. And then I did catch somebody else told me about Holacracy, and then I did I think first I did the training. I was 2 years ago, something maybe like that, or 2 years and a half. And I did this one-day intro with you, Brian, and then followed by the 5-day certification training. And I discovered Holacracy. And I think the main, let's say, difficulty is that Holacracy is difficult to be explained.
Yeah.
And when you haven't have the chance, I realized what was the beginning of Holacracy when I see you facilitate the governance meeting we had at this intro workday.
Yeah, it takes the actual experience, and I think for many people it takes moving beyond even just the intro workshop and into the certification training to even get a sense that the two methods are not just different, but as I say, almost completely different things. Because strangely, paradoxically, they do look so similar, and there are reasons for the similar look, and there are reasons for their radical differences as well. But it certainly created some confusion out there among the folks familiar with Sociocracy, many of whom have a very similar reaction that you did initially of this just looks like a rebranding when, again, I don't even think it's fair to say it's not even just a derivative, it's a completely different thing that has absolutely integrated and used and borrowed some concepts and some practices from Sociocracy, but put them into a very different meaning, paradigm, framework, structure. So let me use that to bridge into kind of my own story of finding Sociocracy. While I was on my path to trying to find better ways of working together, of organizing, of running a company, and we'd already gone down that road quite a bit by the time we ran into Sociocracy. We had actually several components that will look fairly similar to what you'll see in Sociocracy in place before we'd even heard of it. We had, from our background in the Agile software development movement, we had self-organizing teams set up. We had a whole lot of dynamic steering, actually. I think far more than Sociocracy points to or tries to incorporate through the background in Agile. A lot of dynamic steering, a lot of a real focus on self-organizing teams throughout the organization. And what we also had it was decision-making that led us there. We had various forms we had tried. Flirted with some consensus decision-making, which was just tragically misguided. And we were looking for specifically a decision-making process. And we went around Googling participative or cooperative, integrative, not in that word, but decision-making methods that give everyone a voice, that are somehow formal processes to allow decision-making among groups where everybody has a ability to participate and contribute. You know, we had actually come from experience of one specific decision-making method we had used that we found was lacking a little something. So we were out looking, Googling for others when we ran into Sociocracy's consent-based decision-making process. And that was actually what we found initially that led us to looking at the Sociocracy thing. And as we investigated further, we found it wasn't just a decision-making method. They had some other things behind it, some principles. And some of those looked very similar to what we were already doing. They had the idea of self-organizing teams. Great, check. You know, already had that, so that looked aligned. They added this concept of double linking, which I thought was really cool and quite a brilliant contribution. So we integrated that. Although, of course, we'll get to the differences because it's integrated, but it means something completely different in Holacracy as it does in Sociocracy. But either way, it was still a major contribution, I thought. We pulled that in. And then we played with the consent-based decision-making process. And, you know, we found it took us a step forward. And I pretty quickly, after maybe a year or so of playing with that and tried diving into everything the Sociocracy world had to offer that we weren't already doing and adding those components, absorbing that, it quickly became apparent that this had some great contributions to make, but it wasn't really what we were looking for. That at the time we could barely even language what we were looking for. It was just a sense that the way this decision-making process was structured was not what we were after, although I liked the mechanics of it, and there were elements of it that I thought were great. The rounds, great idea, brilliant. And there were some other pieces as well. So our journey was then taking the mechanics offered by sociocracy's consent-based decision-making and reframing the meaning of that process entirely to come from a different paradigm, a different underlying mindset, which we'll talk about, I'm sure, in a minute here. You know, on the other side of it, the two processes I feel like are barely even comparable. I think as language you used in our last call, when you look at Sociocracy's consent-based process and Holacracy's integrative decision-making process, they're looking for different things entirely. They're asking different questions entirely. And yet the mechanics look quite a bit similar. And Holacracy definitely owes a debt of gratitude to Sociocracy for its contributions in terms of some of the mechanics of that structure, as well as for the election process, which is much more similar between the two models, and the double linking, although again it's reframed and the structure is based on something totally different in Holacracy as it is in Sociocracy. But I don't know, that's my assessment, at least. Let me ask you, Bernard Marie, as you look at both methods with your much richer background in Sociocracy than I ever had. I really just read a book, flirted with it, and talked to a consultant over a couple of days as we were playing with it. Tell me, what do you see that looks similar? What do you see that looks like Holacracy extended or used wholesale or borrowed from Sociocracy? What is it from your perspective that jumps out?
Yeah, you know, if we compare two slide decks, one presenting Holacracy and one presenting Sociocracy, what would be the you know, the diapositives, the slides would be very similar. I think one is obvious. The first one is circle, because in Sociocracy and Holacracy we have got circles. They are not the same, absolutely, but when you see that, it's the same word. The second one is the decision process making. If you look at the steps, just having a look at the steps and see that on a PowerPoint, they just looks very similar. Then coming to the election process, it looks again very similar. And I think the last part is double linking. If you look at you know, the subcircle and the broader circle in Holacracy, or the higher circle and the lower circle in Sociocracy, with the double linking, again, it looks like very the same. So these are, in my opinion, the four pieces, and that's a trap, because these four pieces are the same four principles describing Sociocracy. So you have the definition of Sociocracy with the four, and then you can see the slide deck. They just look like similar.
Yep. Yeah. It's no wonder it's often quite confusing. And of course, what then we can look at, which is interesting next. You hinted at, although the steps would look similar and the circles, you know, same word, there is a different meaning underlying. So that's one thing we can look at. And then the other is what's not evident at all, what wouldn't be in the Sociocracy slide deck whatsoever, because Sociocracy isn't designed to deal with it. It's just not covered, where Holacracy has some other structures and processes as well. And I think when we look at the four things you referenced, we'll see the influence of Sociocracy on Holacracy in some of it, and we'll also see why I maintain that, from my perspective, they look like completely different models, without in any way dismissing the contributions that Sociocracy led to in the development of Holacracy. So let's dig into those. Actually, let me let you take it. How would you point out then the distinctions that you see that are different?
Yeah, well, if we go back to the four principles, and then just in parentheses, we have to go to paradigms afterwards. But when coming back to the four principles, the circle in Sociocracy is just like a team, a group of people, of individuals, which is absolutely not the case in Holacracy. Maybe we could change the word in Holacracy. You can explain better than me that a circle is a cell. It's a scope of work, nothing to do with people, with role and accountabilities, nothing to do with people. But and the consent, the consent process, decision making process, is just to make decisions between peoples.
Yeah, let me pick up on that. You're pointing directly at what I view as a completely different underlying intent and paradigm between them. Although the final goals of sociocracy, I think, are in many ways met quite well by holacracy, although it's not holacracy's goal. Holacracy gets there a little more indirectly. As you said, in sociocracy, a circle is defined as a group of people. They're fused concepts. The circle is the group of people. In holacracy, a circle is defined specifically without any reference to people. A circle is not a group of people. It's not even a human team. A circle is a function of the organization, a cell of the organizational entity that has certain accountabilities, a certain scope to govern within, entirely independent of the people, and then it further breaks down the work into different roles, accountabilities. We see the process flow for the organizational system. And so there's a different ground there, and this is, I think, some of the major development work that I was involved in the early days of pioneering holacracy. It was I started in many ways in this journey trying to create a system that was all about the people, built on that ground, built from that ground. And what I learned through that journey was that was actually the thing getting in my way of achieving the very goals I was looking for, which was ironic. And then the journey was one of differentiating the organization from the people and looking at an organizational process to achieve its purpose in the world that could be defined in a differentiated way from the people so that we could then have a more conscious integration of the people. And I think, Bernard Marie, you sent me over and pointed me a while back to an article by, I think it's Case Book, Democracy as It Might Be, who was one of the pioneers of sociocracy. And I think it's just really telling when you read that article. You know, there's a part of it, he says, if we really wish to see the whole population united like a big family in which the members care for each other's welfare as much as for their own, we must set aside the quantitative principle of the right of the greatest number and find another way of organizing ourselves. The solution must be really democratic in the sense that it must enable each of us to share in organizing the community. And it goes on from there, and it says, I shall call this concept sociocracy. He's pointing to a way of organizing people, of community, of human society. And it's no different from modern sociocracy. When you read some of the literature on that, it is still fundamentally all about how we, the people, organize. It's a democratic system, not in the sense of majority rule, in the sense of embracing the demos, the people, the we, humans, democracy, voice. And all of that is where holacracy takes a major different turn from sociocracy. Although it achieves some of those goals, I think it's certainly fair to say holacracy gives all of us people a voice and embraces us in a really deep, powerful way. In fact, from my perspective, much more powerfully than I have experienced with sociocracy used in an organizational setting. And it does it by making that not the goal at all, not the focus at all. It's not about that. It's about something very different. It's about the organization's structure for organizing around a purpose.
Yeah. I have a problem of sound. Brian, did you stop speaking?
Yeah, sorry, I'm dealing with a phone. I did not remember to mute.
We have a problem with sound. Hello, Brian?
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, yeah, so Brian, yeah, you're right. Coming from the circle to the organization entity, I think this is, let's say, the basis, the foundations of the two approaches, the two practices, sociocracy and holacracy, are just quite completely different. One is focused on the organization as being an identity, a living system, a full living system, having its own higher purpose, which has nothing to do with the people who are serving the organization. On the other hand, we have sociocracy, and sociocracy is just about the people, and to come with harmony. One of the reasons why I took sociocracy, a part of organizations, was about my family. How can I put together harmony with my family? how can I can put architectures that will allow anyone within the family to be equal, not and in order to avoid any domination structure. So my children could act as equal, even if we don't have the same roles, as equal as I was within the family, and it just did a great job. I can tell you, with if you I can see my children, how they grow. So it's about, sociocracy is about people, and holacracy is not, absolutely not about people in the first step. It's just connected with the organization as its own entity, and from this perspective, then again, when you take this new paradigm shift, which is about organization, then you go to tension, because every living system has got tensions with on Earth. So as a human being, an organization has got tensions in order to evolve. And that's where the processes, all the processes from holacracy take this raw material, which is tensions, and then transform them into a meaningful evolution of the organization.
Yes. Yes, that really resonates, and it's
okay.
Oh, can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah, Brian, we don't hear you.
How about now? Can you hear me? Okay. Oh, okay. Everyone else can hear me. It sounds like.
Manfred, you can hear Brian. I cannot hear Brian.
Oh, that's very strange. Yeah, let me. Some can hear me and some can't. Okay, 1 second.
Okay, so so some of you can hear both Brian and me. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Hello, Brian. Are you with us again?
All right. Can you hear me okay now?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, Brian.
Great.
Welcome back.
Excellent. And Bernard Marie, can I ask you to just stop and restart your camera? I think that might help make sure. I want to make sure the video is working out okay here. There we go. Perfect. Okay, great. So sorry about that, folks. Technology never quite works the way you want it to. All right, perfect. So yeah, I was just going to say, Bernard Marie, that really makes sense to me, and the focus on tension underneath of it. And this is where I think holacracy adds just so much more clarity and shifts the process from being one of organizing the people to make sure we all consent, which is not something we focus on in holacracy at all, to instead organizing around the organization itself, with us kind of stepping outside of our own personal interests and all that to speak as censors of the organization on behalf of its purpose. And one of the places I think this is really apparent, if you look at John Buck, one of the Sociocracy consultants, and Gerard Endenberg, who was one of the originators of modern sociocracy, have an article out, which I thought's a really nice article about sociocracy called The Creative Forces of Self-Organization. And in that article, they walk you through an example of what a circle meeting, in their language, looks like in sociocracy. And I just pulled it up here. I'm looking on page 7, is partway through one of their examples, where it starts walking through how this circle might deal with something in the example of a hairdressing shop. And what really struck me reading that example, it sounds nothing like a holacracy governance meeting. Not at all. So despite the mechanical similarity of their consent decision-making process in sociocracy, when you read that example, to me it sounds like, from a holacracy lens, it's exactly what you don't want in many of the places of it. It's a very different method. So, for example, even in, and it's you see it throughout, but in the beginning it says, you know, in the previous meeting, the circle had decided it was very concerned about a competitor's new styling shop that was opening up on the next block. So just interesting, even that framing. The circle decided it was very concerned. The circle doesn't operate like that in Holacracy. The circle is purely a governance vehicle to structure the roles. Humans in those roles might get concerned and might bring up tensions. No focus on tension here. So it's a collective concern. So right there, there's a fusion of collective in how they're processing it. And then it goes on. The circle had asked Michelle to investigate and propose what they should do to handle the new competition. Again, not something you would see in Holacracy. A human being asked by the circle directly, by name, Michelle, to investigate and propose a specific operational solution. In Holacracy, you don't propose operational solutions in what we call a governance meeting. Holacracy makes a very significant distinction between governance and operations, governance outputs that are allowed through the integrative decision-making process. Sociocracy has none of these distinctions. So in Sociocracy, this is a perfectly fine thing to do. It's the example in the article. The circle asks Michelle to go investigate and propose. Michelle does that. She comes back and she proposes offering new discounts. Michelle proposes to the circle offering new discounts. It goes on to say, she asks for people's personal reactions to it through the reaction round, and then from there, she's trying to address people's personal concerns. For example, it uses as an example how this might affect their personal profit sharing and how people feel about the proposal as a result. And then they ask ultimately in the what they call the consent round, can everyone consent to this proposal, even though obviously it's going to affect their personal profit sharing, and then in the end they decide to offer these discounts. And there, from a Holacracy lens, there are so many things wrong with that, I don't even know where to start. It's violating about 4 different core rules and principles of Holacracy along the way. Again, pointing out just the vast difference here between the two methods and what looks like a similar process. And it's even in the tone of how the example meeting runs in that article, it doesn't sound like a Holacracy meeting, not at least one with skilled facilitation. It's a very building buy-in and consensus process to a specific decision. Holacracy governance meetings are not about that. Holacracy governance meetings wouldn't even be allowed to decide to offer a 20% discount, which was part of the example. Holacracy governance meetings are only allowed to define who has what authority. That's it. So we could define a finance role that has authority for publishing a financial model, and maybe another role that has authority for offering discount programs within that model. But we don't define specific decisions. We don't say, we're going to offer this specific discount, not allowed. Nor are we asking for people to consent in any way, shape, or form. That's not how the decision-making process is focused or grounded. We're not asking people, can you consent to this at all? We're only asking people around a governance proposal, not a proposal of a specific operational action or decision, but around the authorities and the roles at play. We're asking people, do you see any reasons that this will move us backwards or cause harm from where we are today? And there's a whole set of detailed definitions for what that means. So the question is different. We're not asking, do you personally consent? Are you okay with it? Can you live with it? We're not building buy-in among the group at all. It's a completely different process. It feels different, it looks different, and the rules of the game are completely different. What's described in this example would be so far outside the rules of Holacracy. If I read this, I'd say, there's no way this organization is practicing Holacracy. In fact, it sounds quite a bit like they're practicing Sociocracy, and not at all anything like what I would understand Holacracy as, or what's documented in the Holacracy Constitution. There's a constitution. This isn't just in my head. These rules are written down as well. But yeah, I thought that was really telling, and I wanted to check out your take on that as well, Bernard Marie. The examples in that article, to me, are among the best examples I can think of to highlight the differences. They do a really good job of highlighting Sociocracy, and a really good job of highlighting exactly what you don't want with Holacracy. What do you think?
Yeah, I think you are on a major difference, which is another shift of paradigm. within holacracy there is a creation, and this is very difficult to understand at the very beginning. There is a new space, which is a governance space. And if I take from the very beginning, there is a power shift. There is a power shift. The seat of authority in holacracy has shifted from the pyramid, the hierarchical pyramid with the the CEO and so on, to the holarchy. And from that point, then for doing that, the authority, the seat of authority, is shifting from human beings to a space. And this is what we call in holacracy the governance space. And again, we have the same word, governance, which is used in different ways. Yeah. Governance and dynamic governance, if you refer to John Bach, he uses sociocracy or dynamic governance. When he uses governance, it is not the same meaning of governance in holacracy. This is one of the reasons, in my opinion, that we cannot understand each other when we compare sociocracy and holacracy. Yep. So maybe, Brian, you could give us some insight about what is the governance space within holacracy.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And also, I think there's a couple of points you made there. And then, Manfred, I see you've got a question. We'll get to you in a second here. You make the point, I think, really well. One of the reasons it's so confusing is the language is so similar, but it's pointing to completely different distinctions. So sociocracy talks about itself being a governance method, and yet from the definition of governance that I'm using in my language around holacracy, when I look at sociocracy, I don't see a governance method. From my language, I'd say sociocracy isn't a governance method. It's a decision-making method, and it has some tweaks to the current way we organize a hierarchy of people in an organization, but it's not a governance method. And now I know it all depends on your definition of governance, but what I mean by that, in holacracy, governance meetings are used to define and distribute the authority of the organization. It's used to define who can make which decisions outside of governance meetings, in what roles, within what limits, with what due process. It is an authority distribution system. It's not just making a decision. Governance meetings in holacracy are not about making specific decisions about what we're going to do or decide in the organization. It's about distributing authority. Sociocracy, on the other hand, has no formal means or methods of distributing authority. In fact, what they do is layer on a decision-making method on top of the current organizational power structure. And they give that decision-making method authority to trump that current power structure within the meetings, but that's it, and even that is really fuzzy. So, for example, if you look at John Buck's process guides that he's published for Sociocracy, he makes the point in those guides that operationally, when you're in an operational meeting, not what Sociocracy calls a circle meeting, operational meetings, the lead link, in their case, makes all the decisions. And it says that specifically in his process guide, which makes sense when you don't have a governance system. You fall back operationally to leader decides. Holacracy replaces that. That's not true in holacracy. In holacracy, there is a governance structure that you are filling out. This is where we get into our roles and accountability system. You're filling that out in governance meetings so that in operational situations, day-to-day work and operational meetings both, you use those new authorities, and it is not true that the leader has the authority to trump or to make decisions or anything like that operationally. In fact, the leader's authority is quite limited operationally, and it's subject to what's defined in a governance meeting. And then the other trouble, without a tangible governance paradigm, it makes even the decisions that are made in sociocracy's circle meetings suspect. And I don't mean suspect in a negative way, but difficult to sustain. So you make a decision in a circle meeting in sociocracy, even if that decision is trying to affect things outside of the circle meeting, which presumably it is, then you go to the operational work, and now there's a real question mark around, okay, so how does that show up? How does that constrain or limit the leader's authority or not? When does the leader have to go back to the circle meeting to change it or not? And I think all that gets really fuzzy in sociocracy because there is no governance structure to hold a distribution of authority. with holacracy, that's the domain of governance, and that's why you don't allow outputs in holacracy like the one in the example from the article I was just pointing to. You don't allow specific decisions to come out of governance meetings, because then how do you know when those decisions can be changed? If you have to go back to a meeting to do that, it doesn't work. If you make specific decisions about specific operational details, you're relying on a groupthink process that I found had severe limits. It was still better than relying all on an autocratic leader who might get completely stuck. But what holacracy tries to do is create a governance system for defining who's paying attention to what. And it really is about attention. It's about who, what role is paying attention to what, so that they sense tensions, who's accountable for processing which tensions, what tensions need to come back to the circle. Those are the governance tensions to evolve how we process tensions. It all comes back to processing what we sense, to placing our attention, defining how the attention will be distributed throughout the organization, and defining channels for digesting or processing those tensions. None of that exists in sociocracy because it doesn't have what I refer to as a governance structure. Now, I know it has something it calls governance. It just means something different in that language. I see, let's see, Margot's got a comment here, but let me get to Manfred first while Bernard Marie's processing Margot's thought there. And Manfred, I know you've had a comment. If you go ahead and, here we go, I'll enable your audio. Manfred, you should be able to click your microphone button, which is right in the top center nav bar, to enable your microphone, and then go ahead and jump in.
Can you hear me?
Yeah,
hello, good morning.
Hello, Manfred.
Yeah, hello together. So, I must say I really love all the details, and it went a little bit too fast for me, I must admit, to get to several points, but I would like to point out one crucial point, and I just looked to the Sociocratic norms. So there are norm papers, what they say about a circle meeting. And for an example, in the norm it says it's a periodical gathering of a circle in which policy is determined according to the consent principle of the realization of the circle's own aims. And then it says, in the circle meeting, policy is determined on construction, reconstruction, and deconstruction of the organization. Repair of structure is a task of the functional organization. So when you now look to the example of the hairdressing shop, basically, when you look to the Sociocratic norm, this was a violation of the norm. So it's really interesting to point that out. So basically the norm says as well in a circle meeting you would not make a decision to make a discount or whatsoever, unless it's a policy somehow, which I can't see here. So, and certainly in Holacracy, the clarity you offer regards roles and that this is a policy or not, and you basically evolve that from my point of view. You make it far more clear. So this is one point. The other point about members, of a circle, Bernard Marie said it's people, and the norm it says it's functions within the organization, and not just people. So you have to be something which has a function within the organization, which is automatically in a normal organization someone who has a role and embodies this role. So this is why I see, from my point of view, Holacracy as kind of an extension and providing more clarity. I see that it comes from different points. I can see the evolvement, but I like the metaphor with the card stack. If I put them together, there are certain things they overlap, and then there are some things on top which does not violate Sociocracy. It is like an extension. The same is with the decision-making process. It is not clear really within the Sociocratic norm how you make consent decisions. John Buck is teaching a certain style. Other people teach other styles. It is not part of the norms, and your facilitation way would be a way to do it to follow up within the norm. It does not violate. It provides more clarity.
Yeah. So interesting, Manfred. A couple of thoughts come up for me there. Oh, and then Bernard Marie, give me 1 second. I'll get over to you too. Yeah. So one question I might have is. Well, I don't know. It's the first I've seen that in Sociocracy, and It's certainly not how sociocracy is discussed or described in the teachings of it I've seen. So that's interesting. Might be new, might be old, and I just haven't run into it. I'm not sure. But I think there's still a couple of key distinctions there. In what you said, I don't know that it's true that you can layer one on top of the other, and there's a difference in directionality. So it might be true that practicing holacracy within a sociocratic organization is not actually a violation of any core terms of sociocracy. I think that's probably true. The reverse is not true. If you tried to bring in sociocracy principles and norms and rules and practice them in a holacratic organization, you would be violating its core rules and principles. So there's a difference in direction there. And what that also points to is there's a different bar or threshold. So you can certainly practice holacracy's rules within a sociocracy container, but the sociocracy container still provides a baseline that if that you can fall back to there, then you are not fully embodying holacracy. In the same way that you can practice sociocracy within a conventional power structure, organization, corporation today, and you can do that, sure. There's nothing in our legal structure for how a corporation is structured that says you can't choose as a leader to run it with sociocracy. But you can, if you fall back there, if you violate the consent process entirely as a leader because you have the legal authority to do so, right? You've now destroyed that new foundation and fallen back to the conventional paradigm. And in the same way, this is true between sociocracy and holacracy. So you can take a legally sociocratic vehicle, if you legally adopt sociocracy, though I don't actually think that's possible, but that's another discussion. It's not defined in a concrete enough way to be possible to really legally embody. But if it were, you could certainly practice holacracy within that container without violating the rules of the sociocracy container. However, you could violate the rules of holacracy and fall back to that sociocracy container and kill holacracy and what you're trying to do with it. And once you, if you made the shift and you legally adopted holacracy, you can no longer practice sociocracy, right? So there is a clear progression here. There is a transcend and include, and that's not even quite right. It's a reframe. It's not a fully include. It's a change and reframe. In the same way, sociocracy can be practiced within a conventional container. But once you legally adopt sociocracy, you can never fall back to the total autocracy of a conventional container. The same is true. You can practice holacracy within a sociocracy container, but once you legally embody holacracy, you have forever lost the ability to fall back to holacracy or to sociocracy. And if you don't legally embody it, you're not fully guaranteeing what holacracy does and provides. Thus, you're not, I would say, fully practicing holacracy because you're still within a container that you could fall back on and violate the terms of holacracy at any point. So I think that really points to some of the major differences. And Bernard Marie, I know you had some thoughts here as well. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, in the same direction. Just to add that the one of the major differences, again, it's just behind the word governance, which is the same word in the two practices. One of the reasons we were interested by holacracy, and again, I'm very grateful for Sociocracy, and I still use it for families, communities, eco-villages, and so on. But when coming to organization was work to be done for the outside world, there was some limit, and the limit was about the lack of structure. It's too open, a too open model, a lack of structure about governance. And we came with circles with a lack of clarity. What is to be decided there? Do we decide everything? So there was a lack. I know that you can decide by consent a policy, but only a policy. So on one hand, with Sociocracy, you have policy to decide to delegate to somebody, On the other hand, you have a full discipline coming with Holacracy, a structure about the new space of governance and defining, like, mathematics or languages at school. You have a new material, a new structure, a new discipline, which is governance, very precise with roles, with accountability, with process, with politics, and so on. And this is a major difference. And when you come into that space, which is allowed by Holacracy because it is very comprehensive and very precise, then you can you are in a space which is not connected to the operation, not connected to the people, which allows something new, because you have got a new space, a new dimension you don't have in the sociocracy. And that was where we have the limit with the organizations. And now the same organization, we go to them with this holacratic staff. And so there is, to make a synthesis, there is a kind of integration with holacracy between the shift of power, which is a full shift of power, which is not the same case in sociocracy. Holacracy is no more a pyramid. It goes to hierarchy, which is not the case with sociocracy. And so there is a shift of power on the, and at the same time, within the role, there is a autocratic empowerment position for each people into the organization, so that there is no more leader in holacracy, and at the same time, everybody is leader. And that's a big shift. And it is allowed because of the structure of governance. Very precise and very comprehensive.
Yeah, and so interesting, one of the things that's coming up for me around this is you can look absolutely at holacracy as an extension to sociocracy in the same way you can look at sociocracy as an extension to our conventional top-down or organizational paradigm. It is no more or less of an extension in either of those cases, I'd say. So in the same way, somebody that is completely grounded in the way we organize today commonly in our conventional top-down, leader-driven business models, business structures, somebody grounded in that can look at sociocracy and say, this just looks like an extension of the way we do things, and it is. In that extension is novelty, and in that novelty is a new ground that makes new things possible. And it is an extension. It is absolutely an extension of that, from that perspective. I think the same is true, no more or less, than from the perspective of somebody familiar with sociocracy. You can hold that space and say, look, it looks like holacracy is an extension. And that is true in that perspective, from that ground. How we got there is a little different. Holacracy had many different influences and wasn't a direct, just pure extension, although sociocracy did influence it. But from the perspective of sociocracy, you can look at holacracy as an extension in the same way somebody can look from a conventional perspective to sociocracy and see it as an extension. And in that extension, in either gap, lies novelty and lies reframing and adding something new. So, there's a directionality to it. You know, the leap from conventional to sociocracy adds new capacity. It adds new clarity. It adds new distinctions that, sure, don't necessarily directly conflict from at one level with what came before, and yet at another level do. They're putting a new ground for decision-making in place. And holacracy puts a new ground for decision-making, one that is not based in the people's consent. It's not based in that at all in holacracy. The ground for decision-making is based in the purpose and a process for processing tensions to evolve the organization. With humans as sensors, it's treating the humans completely different. So sure, you could choose as a group of humans in sociocracy to do that and to treat yourself that way. There's novelty in that as well, and it's a different ground, and one that there is some value in systemizing and guaranteeing in the same way that there's value in guaranteeing the leap from conventional to sociocracy. Once you guarantee that ground, you've protected something novel and valuable so that it can't slide backwards. And I think the same is true when you look at the ground holacracy comes from, which is as different from the ground under sociocracy as sociocracy's ground is as different from the conventional. So I think that's an interesting point. And Bernard, go ahead.
Yeah, just when a thought came to my mind when I was listening to you and to Manfred, maybe some people are aware of the spiral dynamic, and when you look at this model, I like it very much. My feeling is that sociocracy is much more in the green meme. I mean, and it's very oriented people and community, and holacracy is doing the integration of the green and the orange and the blue, of course. And so for me, it's integration that characterizes the most holacracy. And this is possible, again, sorry to repeat it, this is possible because holacracy did make clarity on a new and created from scratch a new discipline, which unfortunately is called governance. Maybe we should have you should have taken another word.
Yeah.
But this is this new discipline that allow a new space, and from that perspective, this new space integration is now possible, which was not possible just before, and that's where I think that's where I can see that.
It's a beautiful way of putting it. I think it really resonates, and of holding it. It is creating a new structure, and that's where the novelty is. And that novelty, you can point to many influences, which is our goal in this whole series of calls we're doing now, all of which had something to offer, and yet none of which explains the novelty. There is novelty in holacracy, a new space it offers. A space we call governance, and a new ground from which governance is done, one that is evolutionarily focused around purpose, that treats humans differently. From that space, new integration is possible that wasn't possible before. And that shows up, to Margot's point, in the stance of the facilitator is completely different in the two methods because of that new space and the new ground and the new way of working with it. And that enables things. It enables other differences that sociocracy just doesn't go into. It can't from the ground it comes from. So holacracy has a whole operational paradigm. It has tactical meetings, right? There's all different structures there that I think are as relevant as the governance structures. And they're only possible once we start with this new ground of really defining what governance is, what it means, and what ground it comes from that allows it to integrate humans and organization in a completely new way. And once you have that ground, you can now do cool things operationally. You can do cool things outside of meetings that are not possible in sociocracy. Sociocracy's focus is very much in the meetings. Holacracy's is not. Most of holacracy is not practiced in meetings. Most of holacracy is practiced day to day in your work, in your roles. The meetings just give you some clarity and a needed ground to do work differently day to day. So one of the sure signs I see in somebody's understanding of holacracy is when it advances to the level where they no longer look at holacracy as about meeting practices. It's not. Holacracy has meeting practices, yes, but most of holacracy is not practiced in meetings. It's the meetings and the new ground and paradigm and the space of governance that you point to, Bernard Marie, that allows the day-to-day work to be so radically different, and the dynamics between humans to be so different, the culture among humans to be so different. Holacracy is not just about the meetings, and it's because of that ground. So, and of course, just to acknowledge, there are again, so many nuances to these distinctions we're making that we've had this conversation before. I'm sure we'll have it again. There's no way we can possibly convey all of these distinctions in an hour.
Yeah,
it's hard.
That's for sure.
We've had many people go through our full workshop, our one-day workshop or equivalent, familiar with sociocracy, and still not fully get the differences. Because they are so subtle and yet so profound all at the same time. It usually takes somebody going through our 5-day certification training program to really see them and to really experience and feel that new space of governance and how radically novel it is from whatever they're used to in sociocracy. And yet, I think similar to what you've expressed, Bernard Marie, holacracy still meets many of the same goals of embracing the people that sociocracy aims for. Some of the same goals that you might be attracted to sociocracy for, I suspect you'll find in holacracy. A little bit different way to get there, in a little different form. But frankly, from my point of view, I would never want to work in a sociocracy-powered environment now, just because I've got a taste of deeper integration, of deeper embrace, and of one that is more honoring than I have experienced sociocracy as. In the same way, I think that many people, once they've experienced sociocracy, would not want to go back to a conventional. Does that resonate with you?
Yeah, on that point, I think Brian, one a key staff, and you are well placed to speak about that, and me too, as we are both founders of companies, is because of, again, this new space and this new structure, differentiation between the founder and the structure and the organization is possible. Differentiation between the people and the structure is possible. And because of that, and it is the same with the parents and children metaphor, because of that, it allows the structure to evolve on its own path, and again, at the same time, it allows people to evolve also on their own path.
Yes. Yes, it does. And that goes to circling back to the Kees Boek article, and he's talking about governance in a societal sense, but he talks about wanting to see the whole population united like a big family in which the members care for each other, etc. And ironically, holacracy, that doesn't resonate quite the same way. It's where sociocracy is aiming almost to just get a real fusion of the people, to get a team by making everybody kind of on the same page through consent with each other. Holacracy is trying to do almost the opposite. It's trying to give everyone so much differentiation and autonomy that they can choose integration without it risking their self, their boundaries, and its vision of government and society is also as night and day different as that as could be. But without getting into that can of worms, Holacracy's vision of societal governance looks a lot more like lack of governance, a lack of government, and a different process for achieving governance. But it's not trying to force a unite, and that's the magic and the paradox in Holacracy. It's trying to give such clear boundaries, distinctions. Territory is a word you've used. I loved it. It's trying to differentiate humans and the collective so much that we can choose a more conscious integration without that being forced, without that being a violation when it happens of anyone's sovereignty. Is another word that you've used a lot that I really like. So it's a really different way of doing it, and it's paradoxical. It's like it gets that which sociocracy seeks better than sociocracy does from my experience, but it gets there a completely different way by something almost opposite to what sociocracy seeks. It's not about trying to get consent, buy-in, unity. It's not any of those things. And yet it gets those things by focusing on a purpose and expressing it in the world. And giving a clear space where we each have our autonomy and sovereignty to show up in that space without requiring us to be on the same page, and thus it allows it to emerge, which is a very interesting phenomenon, I think.
Yeah. Let me illustrate that, Brian, because we have trained people on Sociocracy and organization, a small organization which is fully applying Sociocracy principles for years, not 1 year, years. And they came to this difficulty I did speak about sooner. And now we are implementing Holacracy with them. So now two things. First, Holacracy is not about only meetings. And the meetings in Holacracy is just maybe 2% of the time. 98% of the time we work. Yep. But for this 98%, of the time, this organization did take advantage of the sociocratic processes for collective intelligence on, brainstorming, create cooperation, co-creation of new staff to come together to put together new idea and so on. So they use it so it's integration. So that's the first point. They have Holacracy, and I can tell you they do full Holacracy. Tactical meetings, governance meeting, and strategy and aim, and also all the staff. And at the same time, they can have spaces for with sociocracy process. So that's the first observation. Second observation, which is very, very interesting. During the first 2 months, we have implemented Holacracy with them. The differentiations between them, the power dynamics between them did evolve, and it was a lot of evolution, personal evolution. With these are a team of only 4 people, and the dynamic between the 4 personalities did evolve incredibly, and so were to some kind of empowerment of each of them. Yep. And that's so So it was magic. So again, it's about integration, and it's not the same thing. It's something else.
It's a shift from sociocracy giving us a more of a codependence, and even in with the unity that sociocracy goes for is the codependence. Holacracy moves beyond that to a true level of autonomy and power, and still retains the deep integration. And there's a big shift to make from we the people as a team are going to be united to no, I'm going to be an autonomous, empowered individual and show up in a team in flow with each other. And it's a very, it's a big shift. It really is a big shift.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I have a hunch that, again, we could go for hours more exploring. I feel like, I don't know about you, I feel like we've just maybe hit on 5% of what we could have talked about. You know, there were so many more. We didn't even talk much about the operational side. We could have talked a lot about that. So much more. But we will keep carving away at this big, big ball of confusion that is out there. And I hope in doing so honor the significant contributions of what sociocracy did bring forward into the world, and the role it did have in shaping some of the early formation of holacracy. And at the same time, looking at what is truly novel and different and moving forward. So thank you, Bernard Marie, for being here to share this and explore this with me.
Thank you, Brian.
Appreciate your thoughts, and we'll call it a wrap, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today. Join us for our next call coming up in a couple of weeks. You'll see it advertised on the website. So thank you, and have a great day.